again. I'm Zia Weiser, I'm Politico's climate reporter, and for the next half hour or so, I'll be discussing the EU's efforts to prepare for a warmer world with my three panelists. So with every fraction of a degree, the disasters are mounting. So yeah, we've got to prepare, and those efforts, those preparation efforts, often require cooperation at different levels of governance. So I'm happy we've got all three represented here, European, national, and local. So first we've got here Elina Bartran, the Director for Climate Resilience at the Commission's DG Klima. And we've got Paula Hanat, an advisor at Poland's Climate Ministry. And finally we've got Andreas Wolter, a former mayor of Cologne and still city councillor of Cologne, who also serves as the president of the Climate Alliance, a network of cities. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. So, Elina, I want to start with you, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Because you're working on the EU's climate resilience framework, which is coming in the second half of the year. What can you tell us? Can you give us any spoilers? What are you working on?
Well, I'll be happy to see you. It's something that we are very excited to be working on at this point in time. Climate adaptation and resilience, they're not new things for the Commission. We already have the climate adaptation strategy dating from 2021. And in the climate law, European climate law, there is an expectation for all member states to have adaptation plans and strategies. More recently, in the 2024 Macroeconomic Governance Directive, there is an expectation for all member states in their national budgets to look at the exposure to the physical risks of climate change. So many things already exist, but we haven't really been able to substantiate what do we want to prepare for? What is the world going to look like? And at the same time, it's becoming pretty obvious by now that the 1.5 degrees will be surpassed more permanently, possibly in the coming years. For the EU, that translates to 3 degrees. So the physical conditions are going to be very, very different already in the coming years. And because of the inertia of the system, unfortunately, it's not going to stop there. So in order for us to be able to drive a system change, to get from repairing damages to avoiding those damages from the outset, we do need to have a mentality that drives resilience by design from the outset of our policy making and from the outset of all kinds of investments and planning choices. This applies to infrastructure, it applies to hospitals, it applies to social housing, it applies to defense and energy security, because it is those structures that are exposed and vulnerable to the increasing extremes. And unless we do this resilience by design, we risk disaster by default. So our framework, as a centerpiece to that, we're going to establish a trajectory. What do we expect to be heading to, and how can we prepare our society and economy to be better able to withstand it? So the common trajectory will give all European policymakers a legitimate and scientifically based expectation of the physical conditions in the future. So we're probably going to be looking at 2 degrees by 2050 and a global 3 degrees by 2100, unless things are radically altered at the level of mitigation. This to EU requires a serious stepping up of our effort. In addition to the trajectory, what we want to have is a clear expectation, a duty to consider this new climatic reality, so that public administrations and policymakers across the Union can be held accountable for doing their job in a way that exercises precaution, prepares for the probable and highly likely climatic scenarios.
Okay, all right. I mean, Paula, what does that sound like to you? I mean, does that sound like what you need from Brussels as someone working on this at the national level?
Absolutely. I think at the national level what we need and expect is a continuation of the higher vision setting and making it clear that resilience, when we are building resilience in the face of threats from a changing climate, we are actually also building resilience against all sorts of geopolitical security risks, domestic socio-political instability as well. So this is where this setting a framework for an economy-wide approach to building socio-environmental, let's call it, resilience is really important. And even when we are working from a policy perspective at the national level, more from, directly focus on environmental policy and climate change adaptation policy, we also need to be taking an economy-wide view. So we can be, implementing the nature restoration laws, and that's fine, and we can be focusing on rebuilding ecosystems and waterways and whatnot, but we will continue to have problems, for example, with water supply and water security if we don't also tackle the problem of water consumption and the water footprint of industry and the food and agriculture sector. So that's why I think at the EU level, what is sort of so great is in the water resilience strategy from last year, for example, setting those soft water efficiency targets. That is fantastic. That is something that we have definitely been thinking about how to address and implement domestically in Poland. But also something else that I would like to add here is how do we incentivize more innovative forms of investment in nature-based solutions? And the EU's nature credits framework from last year as well has provided a great first step in that direction. So if I can give a little example of something that we're beginning to think about in Poland is how do we leverage a mechanism of nature credits, for example, to begin to really add a financial value for all sorts of ecosystem services? And how do we begin to incentivize investment in nature as an infrastructure that provides services and benefits to society and economy as a whole, like any other built infrastructure. So one of the ideas that we're beginning to develop within Poland is a certification system for water retention in soil as an ecosystem service that we would like to be able to sort of leverage on for multiple reasons. One of which is that Poland has continuous problems with hydrological drought. It is a collective action problem for which it is very hard to tackle from any one sector or any one sort of policy direction. And also it is a fantastic proxy measure for all sorts of other environmental outcomes, such as biodiversity. And so in being able to certify and in the future place financial value on water retention in soil, we are perhaps being able to create mechanisms for investment in building wider resilience. And I would just like to also add on that point of water retention in soil that where I think on the climate change mitigation side of things, it is in some ways easier to find policy direction and strategic direction because it is more or less about reducing emissions. I think on the adaptation and resilience side of things, if we can begin to think about water being to adaptation what energy is to mitigation, I think we'll be able to get a lot more traction in understanding how we can operationalise this concept of resilience at the regional, national, and also very much the local levels.
We're going to come back to some of the points you raised, but first I want to just ask Andreas, I mean, what do you need as someone on a local level, like the local level is often where implementation actually happens when it comes to adaptation. So, what do you need from national European governments to make that happen?
Yes, so at first 90% of the SDGs has to be realized at the local level. And first of all, for the structure, I think that networks of local authorities must be the first contact from European Commission and not the consultants and their companies. So I think that's very important, because when something happens, floods, fires, droughts, the people are first knocking at the door of the mayor in the cities. And we know it in Valencia, what happened last year, in Lower Austria, in Germany, in Belgium 5 years ago. And we know what we need and what's very important. And the second point is the investments for infrastructure and the grants from European Union as well from our national governments. They have to be all of them, not only in climate adaptation, all checked of the climate issues, so the impact of climate. I think that's very important. What we need is, we need real money. So one example, the city of Cologne, that's not adaptation, it's more mitigation. We built the biggest heat pump in Europe, water heat pump. We can provide for 30,000 households cheap heating. That's also a social issue. The grants came also from European Union and from the Federal Republic of Germany, 50%, so we can realize it. That's very important, also the money. What we need are good laws. So there's a lack of regulation in climate issues. So I bring an example. In time of deficits, and all the cities have deficits actually, most of them, they do only where the mandatory tasks. And climate protection, climate issue is often a voluntary task. That's also for our energy companies. They have lack of money, and they say, okay, we just do this where we are obliged to. So we need some regulation on the European level that says you have to do this, and that's a fact, and not you can choose. That's the point. One more issue is, by example, what happened when we had the heavy floods a few years ago, the Insurance Act. Because if you have a house and you have an insurance, the insurance only pays to rebuild it at the same place in the same manner. And something would be better to say to people, okay, it was 2 meters water in the first floor of your house, it would be better you build it anywhere. So we provide you a property, but it's much more expensive, and the insurance does pay much more less money for this. And that is also a very important thing, but perhaps also European level as well as national level can change, and that makes it much more easier to protect from this fires, especially the floods. So what happened in a few years ago, and the mayors know the problems and what's going on with critical infrastructure. In my valley where I was born, everything was destroyed. No kindergarten, no gas station, no schools for months, for weeks, for years, nothing. We had to rebuild everything, and so we need also a plan how, if this floods, if these disasters are coming back, are we prepared for this?
Yeah.
Also our administration. The administration was just close to the river, and it didn't work for weeks.
Yeah.
So due to a home office, so it was possible that the people work from home, but we weren't prepared really.
That was the R Valley, right?
Yeah. But it was not only this valley. It was that was the worst. But everything. So my valley, we had normal a level of 40 centimeters of the river. We had 7 meters level of the water, and
God, yeah.
Never happened before something like this.
Elina, how can the European level help with some of these concerns?
Well, I think one of the first things we want to do is to really to increase awareness, across all layers of society. Adaptation, resilience, these are not matters that can rest the responsibility for environment and climate ministries. They're just not empowered, and they don't have the mandate to drive the policies in the relevant areas. So one of the things that we really want to work on is the notion of risk ownership. Because if we don't attribute the responsibility for, say, infrastructure with the national planning agency or bureau that's in charge of that, the fact that the climate department would be saying, yes, but we need to do this, and it's just not going to work. It's going to remain voluntaristic, and it's going to be a soft obligation. You know, nice to have, you add a comma and a sentence, and we will look into climate resilience. Not good enough. So the resilience by design, it has to be really substantiated. And we need to make sure that these risk owners, they are equipped to exercise almost an actuarian approach, so that they, knowing their area expertise and using the different kind of models that we'll be able to develop for simulating the climate conditions, that they are able to make a decision about the acceptable level of residual risk in their particular circumstances. And this is not something that is just across the sectors, but it has to be also vertically, so that you have the horizontal responsibility identified and the vertical responsibility, but also empowerment. Because I completely agree with you, Andras. It's the local level where you have the most problems manifest themselves, and you also have so much creativity and ability to respond relatively quickly. So, but one thing I have to say is that, okay, I love to hear that we need more regulation. That I haven't heard for a really long time, because it's all been about simplification, streamlining, you know, making things easy, and I think we have to deliver on that. So what our framework will be doing, it's more about empowerment and equipping the decision makers to do the right types of decision with the tools that we will also be developing to support the decisions. But that the legal obligations will be relatively limited, because once you establish the duty, there will be a expectation by the citizen, and it will be almost like this democratic accountability that will reinforce and drive the right types of decisions. And we do think that that combination of awareness and acceptance and risk ownership is going to be a very powerful mix. One thing, if I may, Zia, is that also in the context of the multi-annual financial framework, in the recitals we very clearly refer to climate resilience by design. Because indeed, we need to make sure that our spending, the European public spending, is somehow stress tested against climate conditions. Because if not, we do risk large-scale stranded assets and spending money where the exposures are unreasonably high. Already today, the climate extremes are costing us 40 to 50 billion a year at European level. That's quite high, and that money that we need to use from the public purse for the repairs, because indeed there's a massive insurance protection gap, is away from investing into education, it's away from research and development investment. It's really very often just, you know, panic operations to do recovery and building houses, for instance, exactly in the same place, same way as it was before. Exposures don't get reduced unless we get ahead of the impact rather than keep on focusing on recovery.
Can I just ask you, I mean, so when you're talking about, you know, making sure that accountability is taken, but then you're also speaking of sort of like limited legal provisions in your framework. So, I mean, how should we imagine that? Is the Commission going to assign duties and responsibilities to say the cities is responsible for, in the event of a flood, doing this, and the national government of this, or how should we envisage that?
Well, we are still developing the framework, but we are looking at all kinds of different options, and we are also looking at different levels of instruments. So it's not only directives or regulations that we have. We can also issue recommendations, guidelines, and we need to make sure that we respect the member states' competencies here as well. There's the subsidiarity principle is something that has to guide all our work, especially in these times. Fortunately, we have had really strong support from member states. As recently as in the December Council, there was very, very united voices in asking for a legal framework and in asking for a shared trajectory so that we all at EU level kind of know how to prepare for the inevitable and that we are better empowered to do the necessary.
Okay. We've now had money on the as part of the discussion in many ways, like the MFF, the budgets. And I wanted to ask you, Paula, I mean, how does that look like for Poland? Because one challenge with adaptation is often that it's hard to attract investments for, you mentioned nature credits as something that you're looking into, but you know, what are you actually looking at? I mean, does Poland even have a sense yet of what kind of investment is needed? Or, yeah.
Well, I think it's, if I can turn your question around, it's very tempting to approach any problem by thinking, well, let's just throw money at it and doing more, building more money equals more outcomes. I mean, that is certainly true to a certain extent, but also when it comes to adaptation and innovating in times of unprecedented challenges from all sectors, we also have to remember how to do more with less. And you know, on the mitigation side of things, I think energy efficiency is an example of we're actually focusing on being more efficient with what little you have can actually be reducing your costs rather than requiring additional investment. Similarly with adaptation and coming back, for example, to the point of water efficiency targets, I think we need to all be getting better in each of our sectors at each of the scales that we operate in thinking in terms of circularity and beginning to see waste products as assets and waste management, I think, can be a very just being more efficient with the resources that we have. So that's not really an answer to your question about where should we be funneling more adaptation financing, but I think it also comes down to having that risk lens, but also taking ownership for risks, but also taking ownership for outcomes and being able to, particularly at the local level, see climate change adaptation as an opportunity to create much more livable spaces for people. I think the urban realm that is best adapted to a changing climate is generally the most livable one, where people have the best well-being and health outcomes. So that's my sidestepping of that question about finance.
I mean, and Andreas, you're basically saying more regulation, we need more funding, more regulation, and now you're hearing like, oh, limited regulation and doing more with less in terms of budget. Like, how does that, how constrained are you really in what you can do? Let's say, for example, in Cologne, to adapt your city to climate change with the current status quo.
Yeah. We know we are not fast and we are not strict enough. So that is what we know. So I say, okay, put a little bit more pressure on our national governments and also on your budget that it is a task and it will come back. This floods, this fire, this droughts, and for a city it is also very important that this transition is just and fair. So what we see also the discussion, I think in every member country of Europe, there is some political groups they deny climate change. Then poor people follow them because they say, how should I pay for my bills? And that's a big issue. And as I told you, with this water heat pumps, with the support from European Union, we managed to keep fair prices on heating in our city. So that's very important. But so what? By example, the flood protection. We have the River Rhine, and we had heavy disaster 30 years ago, and we made a technical solution for this floods up to 11 meters, 30, so the city is protected, but we don't know what's happening if it's getting more. And sometimes if there are floods, so the big river, they're rising slowly and go slowly down, and there's a good forecast what will happen in the next days. But what we need is also, and what we made is, the documentation, what will happen in which street, the information to the citizens, critical infrastructure. That's also, I think it's much more important than these technical solutions. So for everyone, and what we learned in the last years, the problem are not the big rivers, the problem are the small rivers. They will come in 2-3 hours at levels you couldn't imagine. And so we need warning systems. That is also very, very important, and that the critical infrastructure is not close to the rivers. And that's one of the points. What we're doing as cities, and we get also some support, is greening the cities. So we transform industrial areas. In Poland you had a lot of it, so it's just not working anymore, but transformed to forest. Each year we build a new forest in the city, or the city-owned property, and the people are coming and they pay for the trees, and as a birthday gift, grandma died, child was born, companies are coming and they want to green their city, and we support them in this way. And one very important point is, as cities, what we can do, and we need also, I think, the support from European Union, and there is a little bit also the indigenous people in the Amazon or the center of Africa, to support them. That's a real nature-based solution, to support them, that they can keep their territories and the rainforest in their territory, because we know they don't destroy the character of rainforest. Sometimes they also cut a tree, but not as the big companies and the agricultural companies that cut the whole forest down, and then the problems in Europe and in all over the world with climate adaptation, it's much more bigger if we lose this. So that's, I think it's also a global point of view.
We could keep talking about the global picture for another half hour, I think. But I mean, you've made some great, very practical examples, and that's, I think, one thing. Like, we're still discussing adaptation often as a sort of like an abstract thing, right? And I wanted to ask you about something you mentioned early on, and that was this idea of a common trajectory, which is also something that I believe the EU's climate advisors, the Scientific Advisory Council, suggested. So is that something that you're going to basically say all of Europe, every single country, every single city in the European Union should prepare for 3 degrees of warming, for example? Is that?
That is the plan,
Yeah.
and hopefully we will enshrine that trajectory in legislation. Obviously it has to be a dynamic trajectory, because science is moving faster, or actually reality is moving faster than climate. We can't keep on saying that 1.5 degrees is within reach, because it's not. In fact, we've already, on individual year basis, we have surpassed it. So what we need to now really do is to drive a system change, so that we have this awareness that drives more intelligent investment and policy decisions. Because when we did the 2024 climate risk assessment, it showed that our policies are not keeping pace with climate change. So we can't keep on doing retrospective policy making, so planning for history, when the history is not coming back. So we need to be able to anticipate and project ourselves to the more realistic climate conditions in which we will have to prosper and compete and bring up our children. And I think that's a really important duty, which we also want to have in there. So yes, we will hopefully have that, and hopefully it will also incentivize the right type of competitiveness decisions. Because, okay, it's one thing to focus on net zero technologies, etc. We need to drive that, secure and fight for the marketplace. But resilience solutions and technologies is an uncharted territory which we have not sufficiently assertively exploited. And McKinsey and the World Economic Forum, they actually estimate this market to be worth 4 trillion by 2050. So it becomes a very interesting proposition. And when I look at some of the solutions that we have in terms of precision farming, intelligent, smart steel sheets for coastal management, etc., why are we not doing this more decisively? Why is this not a focus area where we would really build European strength and make it a real niche for ourselves?
Yeah. And we're coming up on time. I know Andreas has to run for his train very soon. So I would invite all of you to, if you have any closing points or takeaways. But and also one question I'd just like you to reflect on is, and that's something I often think about with adaptation because it's so different from reducing emissions, because it affects Europe so unevenly, right? The north and the south, like a coastal city versus a city like in inland, like they have very different risks to deal with. So, how can we deal with that as a European Union and, have that level of solidarity that we want to keep in our union while, in the face of climate change? Who wants to start? Do you want to start? You look like you want to start.
Climate protection is not a task only for the cities. It must be a common task. Yeah. So if you see flood protection on the Baltic Sea, on the North Sea, or the floods in the mountains or the droughts, that must be a common task, national level as European level. So that I think that's important. But because the people who are affected, mostly they don't have the biggest footprint on greenhouse gas emissions, and they are not responsible. As well as we have in Africa and Latin America, so people are not responsible for the floods. And I think we are all responsible for this, and that's my.
Thanks.
Take what would like to tell to the people. Thank you.
Paula?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that. These are collective action problems, and we cannot separate what happens at the local level from what is happening at the regional and international levels. But in terms of, a proxy measure, if you can call it that, I just want to reiterate that maybe perhaps thinking about a water footprint may be a bit analogous to the carbon footprint, and that could be one way of being able to slightly begin to quantify this enormous task of adaptation and building resilience.
Yeah. And finally, Elina.
Yeah, well, it's clear that the EU's exposure to climate change is asymmetric, but it is still a shared problem. The risks are becoming increasingly omnipresent in all parts of Europe. So we do need to step up our game, and we have so much to gain from doing this together in terms of sharing good practices, in terms of really empowering this vertical, multi-level governance and making sure that people feel that they're participating in the effort. It has to be about empowerment. I hate to say it, I don't hate to say it, I'm not afraid of climate change, because we will deal with this, and we have to be able to tell our citizens that we can get on top of it. What I am afraid of is defeatism, that people would somehow give up, and they feel like, okay, it's all too big for us. They're overwhelmed, and they can't participate. So this, awareness, empowerment, and really helping people make an active effort to drive the resilience by design in their everyday lives.
That is a nice closing note. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel. And to the audience, I'd just like you to stick around for the next panel, which will be moderated by my colleague Ben McHugh. And thank you so much. Round of applause for our panel, please.